All right, welcome back. So in this video, I'd mentioned before in the previous that we would be looking at links. We're also going to be looking back at that wireframe and looking at how to actually build out your wireframe with HTML elements. So it's going to be a little bit of both. Same thing with this file. If you want to start from scratch, you can. If you want to take the template, you can do that too. What I might do is I'm gonna close out this. I'll just create a new file. Just let's do new text file, save as, choose our location, which is remembering. I'm gonna call this wireframe. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna call this links. I think links is more specific. We will talk about the wireframe. I'll go ahead and hit save. Actually, you know what? I forgot to click on the format type. So I want to make sure I choose HTML. I'll hit save. And you'll even notice that if you accidentally click on the wrong thing, it'll show differently up here and then it'll show down here. And that's how I was able to tell so quickly that I had made a mistake. So the reason why I want to do this from scratch is I just want to give you a bit of practice seeing how you can build this up again. So we're going to start with our doc type. So that way we know we're using HTML5. And then whatever the date is for all of you. Do the HTML tag next. And we want to specify the language. It's EN for English. Head needs the title. And it also needs the meta character set, which doesn't need an end tag. Our title, I'm going to just put that it's going to be wireframe and links. And something like this, you don't really have to worry about indenting. I'm going to put it back on one line so it doesn't take up so much space. And then we want our body section. So if you recall from the previous video and talking about our wireframe, we will typically have at least 4 pieces to it. So you will have a header, a navigation, which is shortened to nav, the main, which is going to be the main content, and then the footer, which is at the bottom. Now, for the most part, things tend to be kind of in the same place. The header usually has your top logo. It might, a lot of times it has the navigation inside of it. It could be that the navigation is right before it, that inside of it, after it. That navigation might move, and the navigation is really grouping together all of the buttons. So you might also have a navigation inside of the footer. That would be really common. And in fact, with your final project, you'll end up having a navigation both in or around the header and then one that's in the footer too. So you could have multiple navigations. And then the main is going to be the majority of your content, and then the footer is whatever kind of, normally the footer is like contact information, some secondary navigation information, any sort of like policy information that you might have. And so what we'll do, and I'm going to try to make this look similar to what you will have in the homework assignment, so that way when you go to do the homework assignment, it'll feel more familiar to you. So one thing that people tend to get confused by is there's head, header, and then if you recall from the previous video, there's our headings. So our H1, that's usually where we have the title of the website page. And then this title here, this is what shows up on the window tab, just as a little reminder. So this is going to be the title of the website. This will show up towards the top of the page. And then the header is going to be whatever contains that top header information. Header is information that is behind the scenes. Body is what's visible. If you need to remind yourself of that, you can add another comment again where you could say, head is information behind the scenes. Body is information that is visible. Just a little reminder there. All right, so our navigation, that's going to be your different links. And I'm going to just put in some placeholder information here. I'll just say link 1, link 2, link 3. So we have some text that would be our different links. And in fact, what you would have for your homework assignment is going to be, let me think, it's home, tracks, faculty, contact is the information that you would have here. So let me just put link 4. So there's going to be our 4 different links. Main content, this is just whatever else would be on the page would go inside of there. And then footer, same thing, kind of whatever would be in the footer. Now for the homework assignment, what's going to be in the footer is going to be just some general copyright information. It could be just free floating text, or it might be in something like a paragraph. And you might say like copyright, your name. So I'm going to just type in Whitney Bandel. And then this actually helps to introduce a topic, and that is special entity characters. And I have a link on Canvas for that, special entity characters. Your book is going to have a nice little chart that covers some of the most frequently used ones. But the idea here is there are certain symbols that if you were to just type them up directly in your code and then have them show in a browser, they're not going to show the same way. You would get an error where it wouldn't show up. HTML5 is very forgiving, where more often than not, it will still show up, but it won't validate, and it will tell you that there's something wrong in your code. So just because something shows up fine in your browser doesn't mean that it is the best way of doing it or that it's correct. So this shows you like way more than what you really need to worry about, but it is really great if you are needing to know how to write up a symbol. Some of the ones that we're going to be looking at would be like the ampersand. So when you are typing up in the homework web development and digital media, I purposely chose that I want you to use the ampersand. And this is going to be really small, so kind of hard to see. But the way that a lot of these are written is they start with an ampersand in front, and then they have some sort of abbreviation. In this case, it's AMP for ampersand. And then it has a semicolon to terminate it. So like with the copyright, it's ampersand copy, kind of a shortening of copyright, COPY, and then it terminates with a semicolon. You'll notice that's going to be really similar with a lot of these other ones as well. But that's going to be what we're going to use. Copyright, we could do maybe right between this. So I'll do ampersand, COPY, semicolon, and then Whitney Bandel. And then how it's going to actually show in the browser, it'll say copyright, it'll have the little copyright symbol, and then Whitney Bandel. So even like we have wireframe and links, the title is not necessarily the best place to put this. Maybe here we could change this and we could say wireframe and then ampersand AMP semicolon, and then we could say links. And so they show up as wireframe and links, and then we've got copyright symbol, Whitney Bandel. And then we could also put the year. So the year here at least is 2022. And something else that I wanted to cover that also has to do with special entity characters. We talked before about how to create white space using the break to return lines. If you want to add a little bit of space between text, like we've got the text here, what you can use is a non-breaking space character. And if you need help remembering that, you can maybe add like a little comment, or you can add some notes to the main. Like for example, I think it wouldn't hurt for us to add some content here. Whoops, I meant to do H2. So we do H2, we could say special entity characters. Maybe have a paragraph and say, these are special symbols This isn't really a very technical way of writing it, just kind of straightforward. These are special symbols that need to be written out a certain way to show up right in the browser. So we looked at the ampersand and the copyright, but one that I think is important to know about is the non-breaking space character. Allows you to add more than a single space between, I'll say, characters. So where this is different is when you are writing code, it will recognize single spaces, but if you were to put a ton of spaces in between, it's only going to recognize a single space there. It's going to shorten everything. So let's say that with our links here, and let me actually save this page. And we can go in and open this one. So we're looking at our links page. Oh, this is the wrong one. This is the one I made on mistake. So open this. All right, so you'll notice that we don't have any spaces here with links because we just added it in here. And what's nice about this is it can help us visually organize things. Like maybe we want to kind of more clearly see how our navigation is organized separate from our header and our main. We can add in white space to help us read. And then what's nice about it is it's not actually going to reflect in how things are shown here. So there's a benefit to having that white space be independent. But like you'll notice here, we've got link 1, link 2, link 3, link 4, and that's a little bit hard to read. So what we could do is we could put these on separate lines so they're easier to manage separately from each other. Even doing that, it's not going to be recognized. It'll just all be in line with each other, which might be what we want. And then what we can do is we can add in ampersand NBSP for non-breaking space. And we could actually add in a couple of those. This is another thing that people often will mistype. They'll accidentally type it in the wrong order. It's really common. So if you get an error that's kind of around your navigation, you might have mistyped this. And each one of these will be a space. So this will be 1 space, 2 space, and then the one I have here, so it'll be 3 spaces between, and it'll just kind of nicely spread those out a little bit. Eventually we'll talk about how to add padding, and that will be a better way of managing your spacing. But this is really great if you're wanting to go into a paragraph or a heading or something and just do these little tiny spaces. This is what you'll be doing for your homework assignment. So that's why I want to show this, because it will be relevant. And then the next thing that I wanted to talk about in this video is going to be working with links. And I thought this would work well together because in your homework assignment, you're going to need to actually link the text in the navigation. And then it's going to ask you to actually add in a link down below here as well. So it's kind of a good bit of practice. And in the main, I'm just going to go ahead and add in another H2. And we'll add some notes. So we have links in general. And there's going to be absolute links. And actually, before I go into the types of links, let me just say links are created using anchor elements. And so an anchor element, I'll create one up here by the nav. It uses this A tag. So the shortest it can look is just this A tag, but it's always going to have a reference to what it's linking to, otherwise it couldn't work. And it uses href. Another thing that people commonly accidentally mistype, it's easy to do a typo, but think of it like a hyperlink reference. So you're referencing where you're linking to, where you want to go to when you click on this. So let's say that the file is called link.html. So you need to specify with an attribute where you're going to go, and then you're going to have the text that you actually can click on. So I'm going to just kind of turn all of this text into links. So I'm going to copy or cut this. And then once I have that, I can actually delete that one. So eventually these would all get replaced with links like this. And once you have one, you can actually copy it and just delete these. And then this last one doesn't need space behind it. And then you would eventually switch these. So this should be link 1. This one will be link 2. And for your homework, you would change the name so it would be appropriate. So it'll be index.html, tracks.html, faculty.html, contact.html. The biggest thing that you need to know is these will not work if you do not have the file name matching. So right now, link 1, 2, 3, 4, they don't exist. And so if we were to look at this in the browser and click on it, they're not going to go anywhere because they don't exist. This page here is called links.html. And so what I could do is we could change this first one to be called links. And so now, as long as we click on the first one, it would take us back to this first page, which will be fine. So we can kind of go back to our notes. So links are created using an anchor element. And then what we could also say is the anchor element uses the href attribute to say where to go when you click on the text. If you need to, you could add a little note saying that the text is going to be between the opening and end tag if you need kind of more specifics on that. And then there's different ways to write the links. So there's absolute and relative, and we'll actually start with relative because that's actually what we have. So a relative link is a link to an HTML page that is within your own files. So what we have up here, these are relative links because they are going to all be stored within our own files. You could even add a little comment here. These are relative links. They are in our files. And then an absolute link. These are going to be links to files that are not in your file. Oh, let me say like file storage. It's kind of a good way of putting it. So an example of that could be we could have a link to the JCCC website, jccc.edu. This goes to the JCCC website. So this is going to be an absolute link, and you can think of it like relative links are relative to where your files are. So this link is specific to this page's point of view. That'll make a little more sense once we get to chapter 12's content, but it's relative to our file structure and how we're organizing things. This one is absolutely at this one specific address. This URL exists and you're going specifically to this point. So it's going to be absolute. Something that you can do, let me add another one. So let's do like bookstore.jccc.edu. This goes to the JCCC bookstore. And you don't have to write this long of links. I'm just trying to be a little bit more specific in the directions for this. So this is another absolute link, and you can add a target attribute So you can actually have more than one attribute. So far, we've only ever had a single attribute, but to add another attribute, all you do is you add a space in the opening tag, and then you add your next one. In this case, it's target. So we have target, and then we do underscore blank. And what that's going to do is it's going to open in a new tab. This is really great if you are going to a page that's not part of your own website. So that way you don't accidentally drive traffic to a different website and then they have no way to return because they no longer have your navigational structure to help them. So we could add a little note here that says target hyperlinks allow for users to open links in a new tab. Now, my recommendation would be that you want to use these for links that are for different pages. It gets really annoying if you were to try to add them to every single link. Like you wouldn't want to add it to your navigation because every single time somebody would open a link in the navigation, it would just constantly be opening new tabs. When I grade and students do that, I end up with like 50 tabs and it ends up being a lot to manage. But if you're going to something like this where they have a good chance of not being able to get back to the previous page, technically they can hit the back button, but this just provides a better user experience. So that's going to be a targeting link. And then the last piece, this is something you're going to need for the homework, is going to be creating an email. And actually we don't really need a paragraph. We can just do a regular anchor link. So this one's a little different. Rather than having a link to a page, instead what you're going to do is you're going to say mail to, no spaces, colon, and then you're going to type in your address. So mine, wbandel@jccc.edu, and then that's the opening tag. And then what's a good practice here is to type out the address again. And then you have your closing tag. So that way, if someone's on a public computer, they can copy this text and they can still be able to email someone. But then if they are on their own computer and they can just open up their mail client, they could just click on it and be able to email them directly. You could even put this inside of a paragraph and you could say, click here to email me at, and then you could have that information. And then what you would do is you would put this in a paragraph. I know this might get a little overwhelming to kind of read. But again, this is where we're nesting the information. So if you have a hard time seeing this, what you could do is put these on different lines. And so you have paragraph that has click here to email me at, and then we've got this anchor link that's inside of it. And inside of the opening and end tag is where we have the actual link that you can click on. So I'm going to hit save. Try to keep that from moving too much. And now we've got our first link. If we click on this, it will take us to the same page, which we can't really see because it looks the same. If I click on 2, it's telling me the file's not found. We can tell it's still working though, because it's seeing that it's looking for a link to HTML file that's in the week 01 folder, which would be the right place. It doesn't exist. So we know the link is working. It's just that file is not there. Same thing, this should take us to, and you can see in the bottom where it says desktop week 01, link 3 when we hover over it. And then this one is taking us to our campus website. You'll notice that I can't go back. It didn't open in a new tab, so I have to hit the back button, versus this one, if I click on it, it opened in a new tab. So this is really convenient. And then this one, it says click here to email me at, and you'll notice it just kind of shows only this white text. But then if I click on that, it will open in my email, and I'm not going to click on it because I'm worried my email will pop up and I don't want to show anything that might be confidential for students. All right, so this is going to be everything for just our general wireframe. This should give you a good head start on the homework assignment as well. And then this also shows you everything that you need to know about linking for now. Once we get to chapter 12's content, there's going to be a little bit more information like how to link to files that are inside of a subfolder or how to link to files that are within a different folder. But this is going to be the basics that you need to really know about for the wireframe and for your linking. Welcome back. So in this next video, I'm going to be talking about more structural elements. In a previous video, I had talked about the header, the nav, the main, and the footer. And if you want to break down your content into smaller sections, you're going to need to know how to make a few more elements than that are going to be used to help group together things. So the first thing, and right now I've got the textbook open, is the div element, which stands for the division, if that kind of helps you remember it a little bit better. But it's used to group content together, and you can see in this wireframe illustration that there is a header, nav, main, and then there's 3 divs inside of this that would break up the content into 3 different columns. Your homework assignment is going to have something kind of similar to that, where you are going to put the mailing address, the contact information inside of a div, and it's just going to allow you to group together some information there. And then here it talks about the header, the nav, the main, which we had already looked at. And then the textbook has a couple of different examples. This one's a really nice one that's going to be kind of similar to the homework. So this one would be good to look at, where there's a header here with an H1 inside of it. There's navigation with the different links. As I mentioned before, it's a really good idea for you to go through and do all of the different examples, or at least reference them when you're going and doing the homework assignment. Here you can even see an example of a footer that has the small and the italics tags, and then it has the copyright information here. The book has some practice with structural elements. So here, again, another example really similar to what the homework is going to look like, where you've got that same structure. I'm going to just kind of skip through this a little bit. And next there's this section that's called more structural elements. And this is going to be the content that is going to be new. And this just lets you specify, in addition to the div, a few more other ways of specifying content. It used to be that in older versions, and you'll see this a lot in different examples, like if you go to the W3 schools and you look up different examples on how to do things, what you'll notice is that people create a lot of different divs, and they kind of go to the point of overusing divs. And one of the nice things about working with HTML5 is that rather than having a div that, we'll get into this in a little bit, but rather than having a div with an ID called header or a div with an ID called nav, you can just create an element that is that thing without having to give specific names to those individual items to keep them separate. So this ends up being really handy. So there is a section element. The purpose of a section element is to indicate a section. It's very similar to working with a div. So if you are wanting to group content, you can kind of pick whether or not you're going to use a section or you're going to use a div. Now, when it comes to the homework assignment, just follow the directions as they are given. So if it tells you to put it inside of a div, do that. If it tells you to put it inside of a section, put it inside of a section element. But these are all going to be a section, opening tag, section, end tag, and you'll see some examples of this in the reading. The article element is intended to present an independent entry, such as a blog posting, comment, or e-zine article, something where you could preview the item perhaps and then be able to click on it and find more information. The aside element indicates a sidebar or other tangential content. This block display element could contain header, footer, section, aside, figure, div, and other elements needed to configure the content. And then the book also includes the time element. It represents a date or a time. The time element is not a structural element, but it is included here because it is useful. And part of why they included it is because they have this hands-on practice that uses all of them together. And you'll notice we've got this aside And in this case, it's saying something kind of like you might see at the top of a website where they're advertising, you know, there is a sale right now where you get 20% off or something on whatever item. So in this aside, it has a little paragraph and it says, watch for the March Madness wrap next month. So it's not part of the regular content, but it's important and it needs to be in that particular location. So we've got this aside. And then next there is this section, which includes this whole blog area. And then inside of the section, there's these 2 articles. Each article has its own little header with an H3 Valentine wrap. It has the time, and you'll see here the date. The time has a date time attribute, and it says what the actual date is, and then it actually writes it out as well. So there's a reference to both of those. And then there's a paragraph giving a little bit of information about it. So just kind of 2 short little articles, and then this whole section you can kind of envision would just be this ongoing blog. So pretty straightforward. Really, that's all I wanted to say about this. The book will give you some really great practice working with these. Now, unfortunately, we're really not going to use these structural elements for quite a while, so it's very easy for people to forget about them. We will come back to the section element when you go over chapter 7's content, but until then, we're really not going to use it. And so a lot of times people forget that it was introduced, and then when they get to the directions that say create a section, the first thing they think of creating is a div, because it's going to be the one that we use the most frequent. So just be careful about that. I'm going to try to remind you of that when we get to that point. But that's kind of a common mistake that people make, is they just forget that these exist because they don't get used very often. So just try to make a note of that. And really, that's all that I wanted to cover in this video. I've got one more video that I want to make for this week, and that's just going to be looking at practicing validation. Once you have your website created, especially once you're working on your homework assignments, you're going to want to make sure that what you've actually written up doesn't have any errors. And so when you validate your code, you're checking to see if you have any errors. So I'm going to go ahead and end this, and then you can go and you can watch the video on validation.